just 2 introductions, and then we'll kind of maybe just sort of start with everyone self-introducing, kind of go around in the circle that way. But I did want to thank Chief Lynn for hosting us here today at Timber Cove Fire Station, and then also Matt Green, who's a local registered professional forester and North Coast resident, who is going to be our tour guide for today. So I don't know if either of you want to kick it off with any words, or if we should just kind of jump around.
I'd just like to thank everybody for showing up, and this will be kind of exciting to see how it all turns out. So we're going to do a drive around first, then come back and.
Yep, so we'll sort of do a tour, and my understanding though is that our first sort of tour location actually is here, and then we'll hop in the vehicles, and then we'll come back hopefully around 11 or maybe 11:30. We're running a little bit late to sort of have the policy conversation, which we are going to be recording via the OWL, just so that anyone who wasn't able to attend the meeting today can just kind of review what was discussed. So
is there going to be a Zoom connection for people to listen to the policy thing?
We did not promise a Zoom link because we were worried that sometimes connectivity doesn't work out and it's complicated. So we didn't want to promise that and have someone decide they were going to stay in Santa Rosa and miss out. So we're planning at this point just doing a recording. So,
even though we did promise one, we're not gonna have one.
what?
I know we did promise one.
Oh,
We're not gonna have one just for that.
I don't think we're planning on doing that unless it becomes easy and we might have throwing it out with Facebook or something like that. So yeah. That's we don't. We're like, it's better to set ourselves up and then surprise people than to have a negative impact. Matt, anything?
Just welcome everybody. Glad to spend a few days showing, or a few hours showing a few things and evidence for staff, and seeing if we can shed some light on some of the history here. It's not just a recent thing. It's been going on for years, and I don't even know how many trees you guys cleaned up in the January and February storm events, but I'm guessing it's probably on the order of 1,000.
Probably between us and North Sonoma Coast.
Yeah,
probably 1,000.
And so the magnitude of kind of the permitting hurdles and regulatory structures daunting for West County residents right now. I'm trying to show a few things where we can make some minor changes, some discussions, and show you some of the different permits and things that are available and grant opportunities that folks would like to be able to utilize that they just currently can't. So but yeah, thank you for putting this on and coming out and seeing the trees again.
Yeah. But how many years ago was it? We had a whole day North Coast Forest Tour looking at the
that was your first year on the board.
There might have been before the fires.
It was before the fire.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so it's been a while.
Well, like 2016, 17, somewhere in there.
With James Ward joined us, and I think Reno was there as well. So anyway, so we'll do kind of a lightning round of just everyone kind of self-introductions, and then we'll hand it over to Matt for our site tour. So Linda Hopkins, 5th District Supervisor. We'll talk about it.
Tennis Wick with Permits and All. Good to see the chiefs again.
Larry Hansen, Boys Limited, based in Sonoma County.
Marty Campbell, I'm chairman of the board of North Sonoma Coast Fire Protection District, which is the next district north of here. I'm Stephanie Larson. I'm with UC Cooperative Extension here in the county. I'm the Livestock and Range Management Advisor.
I'm Mary Intrican. I'm the chair of the Timber Cove Fire Protection District, and welcome everyone.
I'm Chris Pedersen, I'm a resident here.
Diane Pedersen, president of the Timber Cove Volunteer Fire Department.
Ann Vernon, a 23-year resident here.
John Ray, former firefighter, Timber Cove, now on the Volunteer Fire Department Fundraising Committee.
John Gray, I have home here in Timber Cove. I'm the president of Timber Cove County Water District.
Cindy Cassie, I'm president of the Timber Cove Homes Association.
Scott Farmer, Matt, Timber Cove. Sal Cassie, homeowner here at Timber Cove.
Gary Alford, Permit Sonoma.
Cecily Conant, Permit Sonoma.
Vern Baldwin, County Council. Ben Nichols, Cal Fire, Sonoma County Operations.
Bonnie Plakos, I'm the fire chief, North Sonoma Coast.
Scott Orr, Permit Sonoma. Robert Brown, Permit Sonoma.
Claudia Diaz, Permit Sonoma.
Tracy Lyons, field representative for
So Matt, you wanna take that on?
So what I thought we'd do today is go look at a few projects that are actually either have been done or ongoing. To give staff some ideas and some places to go. I didn't want to go and step on somebody's private property per se and necessarily drive through the subdivision directly because that's not what we want. We want to have a productive conversation and non-confrontational situations and, you know. So the first place we're going to go is actually right out the back door. And we're going to look at the new building that the fire department has and talk about CAL FIRE's basically, you know, what their regulations would be. So I'm going to throw Ben under the bus for a few seconds. And also talk about what permits we would utilize that currently exist to do that work if this building was on that side of the road. Because we're just outside the coastal zone right here. From there, we're gonna go look at a project that the state parks is doing currently. I'm gonna take you and show you a shaded fuel break that's been done. And then I thought we would drive down Highway 1 and show you the disaster that is Fort Ross and Salt Point. And, you know, talk about the dead trees and see if we can gain some traction there.
And notice that fire.
Yeah, and notice the wildfire that just happened on April something or other. And that's the fourth time we've had a wildfire that I can recall in Fort Ross and or Salt Point, right in this area in April. It's a weird area that we actually get wildfire in April on the coast here. But
If the wind's blowing.
if the wind's blowing, anything's possible. You know, and just give you guys kind of an overview of what we're seeing, why, you know, I kind of got really worried about some of the decisions and discussions that were going on in the hearing. But then again, you know, I mean, a lot of the residents know my background is not just management, but also with the Board of Forestry and at the state legislature. I spent a lot of time working on policy development, so trying to figure out a way that, you know, these landowners who are trying to do the best things they can do, you know, how we can go forward with some of those discussions in a less costly manner than possibly what was being proposed. So,
And we have two new
Mark,
arrivals, maybe not to put you all in the hot seat, but want to do a quick self-introduction.
Mark Trevor with CAL FIRE, field design here for this area.
And
Eric Koenig, chauffeur, on this planning commissioner.
And then one thing that I just also want to mention before we step outside is really encourage everyone who does not live here, when you're driving back, just look alongside the road to see the sheer number of trees that all of our sort of local fire chiefs and teams and with CAL FIRE's assistance cleared, because it was stunning. And anyone who was listening to the scanner that night, it was like a battle zone. They just didn't have the resources and actually had to pull back because it was unsafe. An assistant fire chief was injured. It was a really tough time, but that kind of shows what happens, right? When you don't have the ability to get in there and manage dead and dying trees that are within, you know, the defensible space of people's homes and along roadsides.
So
Linda, I'd like to add that it's, the way it looks now is about 15% of how it looked the second week in June.
Yeah,
That's
totally agree.
Just to give you guys an example, when I first moved up here in 2000, we had a power outage that lasted, I think, 18 days. I think that this power outage in January was the longest I've had been without power since that January 2000 storm event, and we were out for 11 days. So, you know, when these storms hit, it impacts us significantly more out here because there's fewer people out here. It takes longer to get responses. Anyway, you know, I think some of the solutions coming out of this, you know, could really change some of those things. PG&E has just spent millions of dollars working on this main transmission line. Some of the work backfired on, and that's where we lost a lot of trees in this storm. But over time, I think that structure actually is going to help. And if we ever get a wildfire, that structure is going to be critical for some of the defense of this area. So while it looks ugly now and there's a lot of stuff there, over time it has some potential. So anyway, let's go out back here and take a look at the building and try not to look at everybody's carpentry skills while they're.
Over to tenants to then have our permit Sonoma LCP staff provide some responses and also kind of updates on current thinking, and then would love to hear particularly from our subject matter experts, but also just open it up to anyone else for additional comment or feedback. So we'd really love to hear from CAL FIRE, from our registered professional foresters, includes I think Matt and Robert are the two, right? And also our fire leaders in the North Coast. So one thing that I think is really critical is this issue of defensible space, where you have one state agency, CAL FIRE, saying we want you to do this, another state agency, the Coastal Commission, saying we are going to make this extraordinarily difficult and expensive for you to do. We need to find a way to address that. And just speaking personally, I am absolutely willing to call that question at the Coastal Commission. I understand there's been kind of some back and forth with the Board of Forestry, with CAL FIRE, kind of who has jurisdiction. But I think we live in an era where we need to kind of answer that question once and for all. And I think that the North Coast is kind of a great test case, quite frankly, to float, especially given what we just saw in January. Another thing that I think really needs to be addressed is this issue of sort of dead and also dying trees, as well as understory cleaning, which could potentially fall into that significant vegetation management, which requires a CDP. But really for life safety reasons, you know, how can we make sure that we are not seeing dead standing trees near people's homes, and they don't have an ability to clear that before a windstorm. And also that's, I think, one of the reasons that we saw so many trees down across our roads as well, with this issue of dead and dying tree in the roadside. And then I also want to kind of highlight something that came up a little bit on the sort of road where we parked, where on one side, right, you've got the nice shaded field right and sort of cleared area, and the other side was unable to go through. And I'm almost wondering if there's some ability to look for exemptions around roads, you know, that our fire partners and CAL FIRE say, hey, this is going to be a really critical shaded field right, the place where we can then contain prescribed fire, or we can make a stand during a wildfire event, and see if there's any kind of preemption that we can take and sort of facilitate that kind of thing, so it would not require a CDP. So if there's anyone else think of any other sort of major topics that we didn't cover, pretty decent summary.
Well, again, there are some other drought and grant mechanism funding, because I mean, we've been in this grant world for the last 3 or 4 years.
And it's not going to be there.
At some point in time, these grants are all going to run out. How do we pay for all of this work without grants? And yeah, so studying up what success looks like at the end of all this, and not just the steps in between. But how do we really go about restoring some of this land to actually maybe have her paper parts of it, or crazy paper parts of it?
Right.
How do we get to the end goal, which is a healthier forest, a healthier ecosystem?
Right, so basically sustainability, but not in a fuzzy way, but in the way that's sort of still bottom line, and it actually has to be economically sustainable for folks to be able to do this in the long run. All right, so
Great, thank you, Supervisor. So I'd like to just have a staff summary of where we are now in the process. So we are midway between planning commission and board of supervisors at a policy level, and then we'll switch to some other staff we will talk about once we get through the policy level of the board onto the commission, what implementation looks like. Cecily.
Just so everybody can hear me. So where we're at right now is midway through the board hearings, we like to think, and but we are currently, now there's draft policy options related to these issues. There's going to be some more coming out of today, some more options. Our goal at a policy level is to create a menu essentially for what's going to go forward into implementation. So the implementation is part of our 3-part coastal program. The policy level, where we're in between here on the board, is the plan only. The implementation plan includes our exclusion orders, our coastal zoning code, really where we're super deep into the nitty-gritty weeds of it. But right now we're still at that policy direction point for some of this decision making, and that's where we want to set the policy that's going to set what are our goals? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the types of things that we want to see out of the program that's going to get to what's going to help both on these big range, like forest areas, and also on the individual property owner streamlining perspective, and how can we do that? And so we have a few different tools already in existence within our current LCP. Part of that is the exclusions, which we talked about briefly before, where it's, we check on it first. It's a little bit of a proactive thing that you wouldn't have to do inland, but it is a process that we can help you through. And then in those cases where there is a coastal permit, there are two types of options there. Most commonly, it's an individual property owner going through a regular coastal permit, but we have also seen sort of a more programmatic coastal permit option popping up in some areas. That's also a tool that we already have to consider something more programmatic, not a one-time use. And so those are another tool that can be used where there isn't an exclusion that can be applied. And so those are sort of the policy directions that we have now currently under our framework. And then we're going forward with these policy options to bring to the board. From there, we're going to go to the Coastal Commission after certification. And if there is pushback similar to the pushback we got in 2015 when we first started going some of these policy options with the commission staff level, that's where we're really going to be relying on you guys also to help carry this forward, to make clear, hey, we want this, we need this in our community, to demonstrate the need to the Coastal Commission, because we see it. We were out here today. The commission's a whole nother step that we have, and that's just one of the unique things about being in the coastal zone, but it's also why it has been retained to be, largely beautiful and effective. So that's just what we wanted to talk about, and looking forward to getting a little bit more into those weeds. That's where I love to be. But some of that is going to be after the policy document goes forward and we start working on that implementation plan once we get that policy direction certified by the Coastal Commission.
So what's the best way for a homeowner to find out if they're in the coastal commissioner?
Again, you gotta give us a call.
Right,
And what's interesting is the map is a visual only. I will have to say it is technically not the coastal boundary. The coastal boundary is as it is defined in the Coastal Act. And so, I guess they could read the Coastal Act and see if they're, what? Gary has it memorized. The coastal zone boundary up to the first ridge line.
It's supposed to be 3 miles inland or to the first ridge line, but it was subject to a lot of negotiation, but it was set by the state legislature. It's not something that we can't move that.
But we do have that, and we have that on our website that has a pretty good zoning map.
But I was going to also say, just go to parcel search at Permit Sonoma, look up your zoning. If you see the letters CC, it'll say, land extensive agriculture, and then the next thing it'll say is CC. That means you're in the coastal combining zone. If you don't see the CC, then you're not in. And some of the larger properties are going to be split because the coastal boundary has no correlation to property boundaries. It's a description that runs from Mexico to Oregon. The state adopted.
So that's where we are today, is almost getting to the point with options coming to the board, and a lot of them informed by this good work in communication today. The board will make its choice, and then that's the document we'll take on to the state commission. Once the state commission certifies this local coastal plan, then we have the sanction to move into the area where I think we can be most effective, and where all the good ideas and communication that we heard today can really come about in what we might refer to as best management practices. That Robert, if you could talk for a moment about some of the processes that we've used around repairing corridor ordinance as an example. And so Robert Aguero, our forester on the site.
I tend to say, once we have moved into that code development implementation phase, it can develop items documents, checklists, standards, EMPs. Really, this documents have you as the landowner, you as the project owner can kind of come through. Does my project or what I'm thinking about doing meet these standards? Yes. then that will point to whether you need a permit or you potentially be excluded. So one way that we're doing that in the period corridor ordinance right now is there's a code line where it talks about fire fuel management in accordance with the county's fire safety standard, and that's sort of a nebulous term, and so we've written and developed a guidance document at the end of that. Really step by step, it walks you through, am I in accordance with common safe fire standards for the project that I are, then you don't need a permit. If you're not, I'm sorry, deviate because of project need, then you may enter into permitting, but we have a way to help you determine pretty concretely if you are. Having a permit, I think would be very, well, with coordination from people like Marshall and Ben, and local foresters develop really solid, forest health standards, for students.
And including grazing through our friends I think with UCCE, so and working with your association. So we're not going to do this in isolation. We want to do this with all of you in partnership. But again, so we're hopefully getting to the policy approval, and we get through the certification at the state level, and then we can get into the implementation process. And that's where I think we can set up this programs with all of you, so that you're not having to send digital photographs and emails to staff every time you want to trick or treat. I mean, we don't want to do that. I know you don't want to do that. And there's a demonstrated history of really great stewardship here in the coastal zone, in these coastal communities. We don't want to upset that. We want to be able to support it without unnecessary regulation. So hopefully that provides you with some sense of where we are today from a regulatory standpoint and how we can get to the point where we are trying to figure out where we get the money for the water. That's going to be, well, if you have an answer for that one today, we're all going to.
Well, we could actually refer to the local fire chiefs who are currently participating in the process to put a fire sales tax initiative on the ballot next year. Being led by the fire services working group, but with input from sort of all of the chiefs. And so that's definitely a potential source of funding for vegetation management. My understanding is there will be a vegetation management component to that, and that they are planning on going for a citizen initiated ballot, which would require 50% plus one, which is a much lower bar than the 2/3 majority that's otherwise required for another. So possibly.
I know what you're talking about. But you know that, I mean, and that's a really pragmatic reality. We aren't going to be in grant land forever. You know, we have, unfortunately, we have been walled by nature since 2017. We've been in reasonably good economic times. And now we see, you know, the state budget going from surplus to deficit, as it unfortunately does. So we do have to come up, I think, in the long term with a more sustainable local source. And the grant waves will come and go. And if we have that local sustainable source, that only means we'll be able to leverage those grants with opportunities better than other people who are competing for them. So
I think my sort of question, you know, especially for the subject matter experts in the room, but really for everyone, is what would be on that wish list for processes that could have an exemption from a CDP? We had sort of a lot of it kind of come up, you know, organically over the course of the tour today. You know, but how can we set that up? And then I think the question from Sonoma is, to what extent can we actually call that out in the LCP itself versus sort of waiting for an implementation, or how do we set up the framework? So then we get into sort of the nuts and bolts details and implementation phase. But basically, the Coastal Commission already knows that this is coming and is already anticipating processes that will streamline and encourage the kind of vegetation management that we want to see as we move.
good, that's a great, so I would create a bridge between policy and implementation. And that is by telegraphing what our expectations as a community are from the state when we do get implementation. So identifying, and we'll come up with a correct name, but basically identifying that we want a best management practices program for implementation that's based on input from fire partners, from forestry partners, from community partners. I mean, it's really just something that direct. And this worked. Our last occasion to deal with the state, didn't end up with a resolution because we had California State Parks saying they wanted to charge for public access to our shoreline, to our coastline, and we said, no way. That violates the coastal act, it violates our, the way our communities have grown here. We couldn't get the consensus with them, so we had to contest it before the state commission, and eventually they backed away. So and that was by being professional, but being candid and direct about what we expected in implementation. So I think we should take that as an approach here.
So Ted, I have a question about, you talk about best management practices and creating a, kind of a wish list or but how much are you looking at what best management practices already exist and then just adopting them?
Oh, I think, yeah, so good question. So obviously you have some great programs, to the extension.
Well, the forestry has a best
Yeah.
management practices as well.
Right, so we've heard those discussed today. I don't think we need to reinvent them that much. Let's face it, we all saw it today. The ecology is the same on the non-coastal side and the coastal side for the most part. So, I think we will have to respect that there is the law provides a higher level of care. So I think if we expect the outcome, kind of implementation we're talking about to be accepted by the state, it'll need to show some higher level. But I think we can achieve that without creating a new burden on the individual property.
So we have 13A, the fire ordinance. We put a lot of energy into creating them.
Yeah.
What if we could do a pilot program, get the coastal commission to back off for say 3 or 5 years? Make it so that homeowners don't need any type of permit to do maintenance within the 13A ordinance. And just see how it goes.
So yeah, you mean it's kind of an interim solution while we're trying to get to?
Well, you're trying to figure out the big game. It would at least give homeowners a right to do something. It might work out and be great.
Yeah, well, you know, in this process I'm talking about here, I don't think it has to be protracted. I mean, I think if we can get started on something like this, overlapping with the effort, let's not do it in a linear fashion. Let's get started on the solution and implementation now. Because it's gonna take, even if we get through the board, and get their approval in the next several months, and then we gotta go on to the commission, that's gonna take a while. My suggestion would be, let's get started on the solution now. So by the time we, first working day after the commission approves the LCP, I'll be happy to call my counterpart, the executive director, and say, okay, love to sit down with you and talk about implementation. We need this one first.
Okay, that'd be great.
13A, that's the requirement to clean up your fire pavement, right? And it seems, it seems to me, we shouldn't be looking at just making it easy for people to do that, but we should be requiring them. I mean, because that's the reason that was developed in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Because our lives and our homes are at risk.
The problem is here. We need to find a way to solve the problem.
Right.
That's what they're working.
Well, so our fire division works this every day in the non-coastal area. And we have the mandatory fire inspections, and we also have, so that's kind of the stick. And we also have care. We have the wildland assessments that are done free of charge. Now those are funded mostly through grant programs right now that we'll continue to chase. But I think it's good bringing attention to it for sure, because we see tragedy in the commons just down the road here. Everybody here doing their good work, but all it takes is 1 out of 10 people to not do it, and you end up with acres of broom just down the road. We got to do both.
You mentioned the practice outside the zone, and you do that every day. If we were to imagine taking that practice and bringing it over to the coastal zone, how would we have to tweak it to make it fit?
Well, I think just as we were talking about, keeping it at a programmatic level. So that, you don't have to get a coastal development permit to do what people in the non-coastal area are already doing to manage vegetation on their property. That's our goal.
So that would be equal on both sides at that level, so at the root, at the mowing the lawn level.
Yes, there may be some criteria that might need to be different.
Right.
Because of the coastal. I think if we just came into the coastal commission and said, here's what we do in the non-coastal area, here's what we do, and it's exactly the same, they're gonna say, wait a minute, there's a heightened level of attention in state law given to the coastal zone, so we'll have to. I mean, I don't want to invent things just to make them different, but I think we're gonna encounter, things like, Chief Nichols' idea of, 3 snags per acre. Acknowledging that there is a heightened level of environmental sensitivity in the coastal zone. Because the way you've been stewarding your property and the way that we've been regulating it has worked in many respects. The extent of ESHA in the coastal zone has grown a lot. That's what makes your, the environment out here incredible.
One question that I have, is there anything prohibiting us from actually putting the defensible space piece upfront in the LCP rather than waiting for implementation? Because I think that some of the other things, like, to what extent can you clear the understory? How many sort of dead trees can you remove before you're actually impacting habitat, right? That's kind of more of a wildlands concern. I think that's where we get into a lot more of the sort of environmental sensitivities. But if we're literally just talking about life safety and property protection, like, can we upfront the defensible space piece at least so that folks can start clearing their homes, as soon as it's now,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it also signals, I would challenge any other Californian, whether they're on the coastal commission or not, to say that
Exactly.
this is front and center in the mind of every single Sonoma. Please don't tell us. Do this.
Yeah.
Because help us figure out how we can, not fight it.
Are there any other
Absolutely.
things that people feel like need to be sort of on an expedited track in terms of problem solving? That aren't going to be challenging or murky with the coastal commission?
Yeah.
Well, I have a question for staff. Once the implementation phase and the work and material and input and process of staff to do that next step, how does that look in terms of when does it start? How does it break down in terms of tasks for your department? How would this discussion fit into that specific?
Well, let's go from the latter to the former. So this discussion is going to inform the policy things that the board gave us a break to do this kind of work. We'll be coming back to the board with policy on it. So that's one way that this discussion is going to immediately impact the process. And then, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to implementation, I think we can anticipate that this stewardship program, whatever we end up calling it, is best management practices or something that are going to happen. I think everyone in the room sees value of it, whether even if we end up quibbling on details. So that's something that we're committed to starting now. So that when we get to certification, we're not just starting, but we're finishing. And they can really finalize it and get it in place. And this whole program, if I'm not mistaken, the implementation program comes back to the commission for review before it in the board as well. Well, with this board, it's a rather activist board, that present company especially, which I mean in a good way. I would imagine, and this is an important thing, this is a generational document, and implementing it is equally important, so I can't imagine that it won't go to commission and board for presentation.
So
And we recommend putting it at the end of the day, like we did the other two, where my colleagues are just too tired to fight me.
So we're going to invent a couple of non-coastal NIMBY awards, not 5 of them. She's on to us.
As part of my. The stuff that's being discussed here, I think nothing strikes me as inconsistent with the plan and planning commission advanced to the board.
Right.
So it's really drilling down, coming up with the detail.
Right.
It doesn't require revisiting any of the major policies.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. So it just a matter is it doesn't. The stuff we're talking about, we don't want to just, well, one, it hasn't been considered by the commission, so, it's at the planning commission, so we want the policies to stay as policies. We want the implementation and nitty gritty stuff to be in the implementation, not in the policies. Otherwise, you end up having to constantly modify the LPP every time there's a change in condition, which one of the things I think we all appreciated today is your environment's changing so quickly. And that's something that's certainly impressive.
Well, it seems to me that it shouldn't be too onerous on a landowner or homeowner to enact the fire abatement necessary to protect their property. That will serve the county better if it's not too onerous financially or time-wise.
I agree.
Permit wise.
Absolutely, right. I mean, as someone writes rules, if you sanction people too severely, they just go ahead and do it anyway. And that's not, that's writing a rule for non-compliance, and you fail at the outset.
Yeah.
You have to.
We
have
should be
balance.
partners. Yes.
We have to respect, especially out here on the coast, the really good land stewardship that happens every day.
And hopefully, if we are able to take care of our property and protect our property, our insurance will go down enough where we can pay for that maintenance. At this point, I just wrote a check for $9,600. Does not include earthquake. And that's a 1-bedroom,
Yeah. I would,
just fire.
I hope it can be used up.
I think insurance is gonna go down at the exact same time as gas price.
In terms of what was put before the board, there are definitely some things in there from a technical standpoint that need some clarification, modification.
Oh, yeah.
Consistency with the board's practice rules specifically. I don't know if you want to delve into that at all. I mean, there's some things that are gonna get you in trouble with the board of forestry.
Well,
I don't know if you want to go that direction now, but
or if you want to work offline with
that's fine.
Cecily and Robert.
And me, I'd really like to hear from you on that and set up.
It's some of the definitions, you know, talking about
Right.
forest land and commercialization, some of those types of things. So, and I'm fine with that, guys. It's homeowners, there's a lot of nuances and technicalities and that stuff isn't germane to how we achieve it. It's more of the language given the documentation.
Hopefully doesn't.
I think this in during some of that discussion, because as I understand, one of the main objections possibly to the policy that were proposed was the creation of a public works plan, which would, according to Matt's paper and others, would make it harder and more expensive for people to get things done. So that's what I understand. So I think we should, I mean, if
No, I actually, that was one question I've kind of been waiting for. So one of the things with that is there were multiple potential programs brought forward. I think the public works plan was one of them, and then I think the other one we're seeing that we could add a lot more detail, open it up beyond, just state parks, regional parks, CAL FIRE, Florida forestry, develop guidelines, including best practices, improve habitat health, reduce the risk for wildland fire without restricting public access to the coast, and then establish a coastal permit exemption, other exemption process or master plan for maintenance activities, consistent with such guidance and, forest practice rules. That policy option was one of the two that was brought before the board. It does require that extra work that we'll do next, that exclusion order, that process. But I think that we can take this conversation today and look at that policy program again that was already brought before the board. And maybe find ways to make it just a bit more inclusive, a bit more clear on the goal, direct staff working on implementation, but to look specifically at defensible space. We mentioned reduce the risk of wildfire. We don't specifically mention secure defensible space. So those are the kinds of things on that policy level that with the proposed program, we could be bringing forward or working on upon certification or adoption of our board pretty much immediately. But the more specifics we have, the more secure it is, also from the perspective of, changing hands and time passes. And we all understand the intent today, but I understand that may not have been super obvious. And the other piece is another policy that we talked about at the staff level is to really bring forward that language of where not excluding, continue to process programmatic coastal development permits. So in these cases where we can't use the exclusions, the ones we have now or the ones we hope to get in the future, what's the policy direction? And to make it clear that we also have that tool. And then by mentioning we're not excluded, that's going to be a flag to anybody else in the future to go, oh, wait a minute, is there an exclusion for this? And to actually go through that process to identify if the exclusion is going to apply, rather than the default, since the document's currently silent on the exclusion orders, to make it seem like we're taking those exclusions away. And that's never been the intent of the document. That's never been the intent of staff, but it's not written in the policy. So I think that's another opportunity, and it's looking for those opportunities right now.
Are there enough objections to the idea of a public works plan to withdraw it from the policy?
Well, no, wait. So one thing to understand about the public works plan is it's an idea that comes from the Coastal Commission that is their proposal for streamlining. So the idea of the public works plan is not, let's put all these burdens that are new on to owners that need to comply with the law. The idea is, and it may not be the best idea, there may be others, or there may be multi-pronged, but the idea is this is a pathway to make things easier so that you won't need a coastal development permit parcel by parcel. And what I'm hearing Cecily trying to explain as well is that if you have a goal of making it as easy as possible to do defensible space work and vegetation management, other things that could be related to it, there might be a multi-pronged. You could say that as a broad goal in the plan, and have additional language in it that we could propose. But there's actually a lot of architecture underneath that level that you could say this might need us to look at exclusion orders, which are a different way of streamlining than the public works plan. So the premise, I think, respectfully, is that the public works plan wasn't meant to be like this new thing that is dropped to make things harder. I think there's experience that we in other jurisdictions that we need to learn from. I really want to know what went wrong in Santa Cruz and San Mateo, but what we're dealing with is Coastal Commission staff who are saying this is your pathway to make things easier. And so I think they may have a good way of making things easier in some contexts that may not work in other contexts. And maybe the best way to do it might be just to say, here's an architecture, our goal is to make it easier, and here's all the ways in which we're going to have to adjust to do so. But I don't know that just withdrawing the public works plan would automatically make things easier.
I guess the public works plan is included in what the Board of Supervisors approves and passes on to the Coastal Commission. It seems to me that the Coastal Commission staff will fall in love with that as a solution if they're not already in love with that as a solution. And I see from my knowledge of what life in the coast is like and an awareness of what a large unincorporated area means in terms of funding. I see that as a huge roadblock. Unless the county is gonna come up with the $500,000 every 10 years to fund that plan and have it apply to all the coastal zone of the whole county.
Yeah, so that's what I think is really important. We figure out what we need, what we think works. Instead of trying to adapt it to what might have worked partially in another county.
Mhm.
I mean, it's just kind of odd to me that we're talking about a public works project and we're trying to figure out how to maintain stuff on private land. So even from the name itself, it's kind of awkward. So I would ask us all, let's just stay focused on what we think will work for us. And not on any given time period. That's another hindrance. I hear exactly what we're talking about guidelines, best management practices that work really well in ag, and work really well in vegetation management here in the county. So let's use that process that we're familiar with. It doesn't necessarily have a time limit on it. It's flexible enough that it can change over time if we need to.
I just wanted, the one thing I wanted to add is that was put in as a program, not as a policy. It's another tool. There's no requirement. And the staff recommendation was clearly in addition to all the other tools we're offering public works program as another tool in the toolbox. But I think some people might be confused that it'll be a requirement. That's not the intention. The intention is here's another option on top of all the other options that are in there.
But I think a weakness in the wording is the failure for the language to recognize that the language doesn't say what's the community over which the umbrella applies. Is it the whole coastal zone? Is it pieces of the coastal zone?
Right.
So Valley Forge to Bodega would have to have one, and Bodega to Fort Ross would have to have one. You know what I mean, because the whole coastal zone is not incorporated.
Right.
Well, there's definitely different environments.
Yes, there's different environments.
Aside from
Different,
regulatory jurisdictions, but here you're really saying is the environmental setting changes different.
well, the environmental setting changes, and who has to pay changes? And that isn't addressed here. When I was confused by this wording, and I went after our MAC meeting, when I went to Google this public works plan, the examples I found were countywide for Santa Cruz County and San Mateo County. And this doesn't say that the county is going to pay for developing this plan. And it left me as a resident and as a MAC member thinking that every single community, does that mean the 5 communities that have MAC members associated with them would have to develop their own? And
Gotcha. I hear the concern about
okay,
funding and cost. Before you did you think?
Some of the answers that, landowners would like to know, we're not gonna know today. So there's things like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that have to be engaged, Department of Fish and Game, because we're dealing with endangered species. It may be that some of these vegetation alterations may not require 2 years of surveys, or they may require 2 years. So there's a lot of stuff that county can't realistically tell you right now. But realize that this is what a lot of forest landowners have to do vegetation work when we're doing harvest plans and larger grants. That, it's a huge burden what the the state of California has asked forest landowners to kind of do in terms of the permitting. And, you know, and so we're slowly getting the general public up to understanding those complexities, of just how costly land management actually is currently. Now, it's not to say it's the desired direction we should be going, but that's the cost of doing some of these things, and there are unknowns. And I have one project where we spent 2 years doing an owl survey in preparation for the harvest plan, had the whole plan written, and was ready to submit. We had one survey left and both was bought out because of the Wall Bridge fire displaced a pair of owls. How could you have ever foreseen something like that? Anyway, my one concern with the public works document that, you know, I can really focus in on is that if it is a 2-year process from when a landowner decides to pull the trigger on it, so much change is happening right now so fast that we're not going to be able to keep up with what's going on. So what
I hear you. I'm very skeptical about that approach.
Yeah. And so
Because I know what we've done in other resource areas, and it's been successful. It's been successful in wells. It's been successful in the riparian. So to get to your point, you're very patient, I promise.
All right.
That you're afraid your arm falls asleep.
It was.
But so, for instance, in riparian corridor, hundreds of over 1,000 miles of it in Sonoma County, and we have one set of best management practices that if you follow in that zone, on either side of the water course, you're good to go. But that acknowledges that that is a different environmental setting than the Oak Woodland or high desert that we have here in Sonoma County. So I know we can do this. It's going to be, you know, to your point, it's going to be a little more complicated because of the complications of the coastal zone. So there may be some areas where maybe there's super sensitive habitat where a state agency, we come up with these best management practices and they push back and say, not here, you're not, and here's why. And we'll have to listen and we may have to adjust the practices. But the idea that I hope we can hold out is that we come up with an initial set of practices that can apply as expansively as possible, as generally as possible within the coastal zone.
The FEMA grant for Timber Cove, is that an example of a program that that you're suggesting?
Yeah, that would be an example of it would be a public works program. That's actually one that we're looking to bring forward as a programmatic coastal process.
So it covers a defined community.
Mhm.
It creates one permit, which each homeowner, landowner within that bubble. And
With conditions of approval for compliance, essentially.
so there's some subset rules for each property owner to operate within that one permit.
Yeah.
So to Gary's point earlier, you know, so what we don't want to do is lock ourselves into one regulatory mechanism. We want you to have options available. So when it comes to managing your landscape and managing the yard with the defensible spacer, we want that to be the easiest thing possible. That's what keeps us all safe.
Thank you.
All right, so that's one option that we want to make sure we have. We also want to make sure we reserve the option of a programmatic coastal permit, one that applies to multiple or many properties. And if that's something that gets us qualified for a FEMA program, good. We want that as another option. You know, and then, you know, we also, we're just going to need to acknowledge there's going to be some properties, hopefully they're very few, where maybe we still have to do the, you know, the individual coastal development permit for it. Not on clipping a branch off your tree, but something that, so, you know, that's more exceptional.
One thing that I think is, kind of hearing from the group. So there's policy, right, and there's also the preamble, which sort of sets the context. And I think that actually, you know, what Matt just said and what we've heard from a lot of folks today is like, there is a huge sense of urgency and things speak very quickly and we don't have 2 years to wait.
No.
And so, I mean, I don't feel the need to remove the public works program, but I do think that sort of a preamble or some context to express the limitations around it, right? And the fact that things like the defensible space or a dead tree or a tree that's leaning 10 degrees towards your house, right? You know, cannot wait. And so kind of explaining, I think, having an expedited path for exemptions, particularly as it pertains to, you know, life safety and your property. And then kind of having, you know, these more programmatic approaches or the thing where we get into sort of the BMPs and stewardship and defining the snags per acre and how much undergrowth and underbrush constitutes significant vegetation management. And, you know, can we say that a dead tree is not a tree? Those kinds of things might take a little bit more time. But I think that kind of focusing and leading with the defensible space piece and really setting the context around the urgency of the tree mortality, talking about all the diseases that are impacting the tree, right? Like, how can we kind of get that into the document so the coastal commission, because I'm sure that like them, the coastal commission staff that you're all working with, have actually been up here to stand, you know, in that parking lot and see all the dead trees around them. They don't have any sense, they don't have any context, right? A lot of these folks, they're more familiar with, you know, Central Coast or Southern California, even though they're supposed to be like North California, they're not really.
Open space is the percent.
Right.
And that's not to be demeaning, that's just often what we're end up dealing with urbanites telling rural property owners what's
to do.
good for them. That's.
Welcome to my life, I'm work supervisor.
I wouldn't recommend doing the public works part of it in general, because Cal Fire's grant programs and their VTP specifically may open up grant funding options for the coastal side of things, where we can actually really do good work while those funds are there. And that is the one mechanism by where it can be done with Cal Fire jurisdiction involved, and with Cal Fire's funding involved.
So basically, one is like an arrow in our quiver, but not the only arrow, right? And my concern is that coastal commission staff is like in love with this, is this is the solution for everything, and we're saying, hey, it's not, right?
Exactly.
Is that kind of safe?
Or the stuff that we're not even thinking about now, that may be an opportunity. And we don't want to have to amend the plan every time a new opportunity comes up in the legislature.
So we want that and we want more.
Yes.
I will refer to that next grade.
I have a question, one of the largest landowners on the coast, you gonna have any influence on them? State of California.
Oh, well, I think we learned about that during our tour today.
Yeah, maybe I missed that. But
So I think the lesson that I came away with is, it's the state is using these programs already. We saw the examples of it. And if it's working on state land, why can't we use it on private?
I mean, once you get out of this zone and you get into the lower part of the county, it kind of changes, you know, and it's a fire hazard too, even though it may not appear to some people, but you get the right day, and let me tell you, it was burned from Rock to Occidental and Heartbeat.
You know, and farther south.
You know, I mean, that was my home.
Come down, I live
You
down.
see it go downhill like it has.
And the wonderful hues that we have of eucalyptus trees that come all the way through the dairy belt. And no, we're hearing the same concern that you're having from people like Joe Posey. So large scale sheep farmer, rancher down in Valley Forge area in Two Rock. And he wants to make sure that he can still do vegetation management in Woodland. It's part of the. So yeah, it's a different type of challenge. I don't think it's significant out here, but it's real. It's real. Yeah. I say we want to go as wide as possible.
I have a question for the fire folks in the room. Is there any North Coast road, aside from Highway 1, which we don't, you know, have the sort of direct jurisdictional authority over, that you would not want to see a shaded fuel break on? Would not want to see a shaded fuel break on. So can we just call out the need to create shaded, I mean, right, this is another thing, right? Like, is there a way to expedite and streamline that process of saying, hey, you know, so that it doesn't mean that you can do one side of the road and you can't do the other side of the road? Like, how do we how do we also look at that as sort of a life safety and infrastructure protection issue? Because that's where we saw all the trees down. If we could actually get in and clear out the dead or dying trees along our.
Highest priority, access and evacuation.
I can talk.
So I don't know how many staff realize this, but the county's grant program funded Fort Ross Road's fuel reduction project this last summer. During these January storms where blank hit the fan up here, we didn't have one road burning on Fort Ross Road during that same storm season. And so it's a byproduct of, fuel reduction and fire reduction can also be a life and safety and.
Absolutely, and another one of those great times in emergency response when I know that Johannes was partnering up with a bunch of you in the fire community to just get roads clear. Because they all knew that that's what had to happen. It wasn't quibbling, people were just getting it done. I think 10 years ago, might have been a little different. So, absolutely. And I think that's a great place to start. So, yeah.
To your point, frame it as both sort of fire, but also storm.
Yeah.
Just general county safety, the amount of time the fire crews are having to spend on that.
A lot of the power lines pass along roads. And if you did push those trees back, you'd have less outages of electricity, less fire starts. That alone would be beneficial.
Yeah.
And telecommunications as well.
Oh, yeah.
And also all roads, aerial infrastructure. What have we not covered? It sounds like there's going to be sort of some technical follow-ups that's really focused primarily on language, but it feels like we're sort of in, consensus in this group that's here today around the need to lift up defensible space, roadside vegetation management, and then to develop a framework to later get into some of these best management practices, like we saw on the tour today.
So starting with preamble, explaining why our Sonoma coast is different. And explaining to the state why we're different, all the challenges, the fires we've gone through, the environmental challenges of like the tree die-off, the bishop pine die-off. And then making sure that we telegraph through policy what we expect as a community that to be able to do in the implementation stage, where we're going to start and overlap our efforts to start generating with you all in the room, and who you represent, the best management practice approach and other options. So those are the three takeaways I have for homework today.
Yeah.
So Bob just stepped out of the room, but I think the one spot that we're missing, now here he comes, the one spot we're missing, so the county roads, that's totally a public works deal. The defensible space is the 4291 deal. To Bob's point earlier, there's a whole lot of land in between the roads and the defensible space areas. So that's, again, I think that was Matt's original idea, was that if it's covered underneath one of the CAL FIRE project type list, then hopefully that captures that remaining land between the built environment and the infrastructure that something's there. Good point, you.
Going back to, what's missing, and I still see this. I wrote you a letter 10 years ago, 8 years ago, about the vegetation funds. And more so than ever, I see a need for public education, an actual process for this community to understand that not every tree is sacred, and realistically, we have to have a discussion about a healthy forest ecosystem, because that is not it. That is terrifying on many different levels. So how do we educate the public to actively manage, to thin things out, clean things up? I still think we need to go back to that and fund some of that education program.
How do we educate the goats?
That's gonna happen. So for the.
But I think that's our immediate mission. I can't wait to get to the day where we can focus on that primarily. But I think our mission right now is let's get through the LCP process that we're into.
So the Board of Forestry is engaging with the Coastal Commission. The Board of Forestry is who basically has jurisdiction over the forest setting. They determine rules and regulations. On top of that, you have the Coastal Commission who has some jurisdiction, and then the county is charged with implementing the Coastal Commission's regulations. The Board of Forestry is finally engaging the Coastal Commission in a lot of these discussions. Some of these things may completely play out outside of this whole discussion. But that could be years in the making of development. It could take 5, 10, 15 years. The part of the problem is that Coastal Commission does not have a forester on staff. And we're incredibly fortunate that Sonoma County is one of 2 or 3 counties with an RPF on staff.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't realize how fortunate we are for that. But the Coastal Commission itself doesn't have the technical expertise. And if I'm being honest, probably the legality to have even some of these discussions because of what a forester does in the realm of talking about prescriptions and thinning and doing a lot of these things. So that there's a huge part of this reason, you know, the government is probably gonna have to fund some of this stuff to get them up to speed. We don't have that kind of time right now. I'm just kind of telling some of you the complexities of out of here and trying to rely more on our local planning level. Because everybody's here and everybody came to see what the problem is today. And this is great that this happened and everybody went and saw some of these issues. And I hope it was mindful members that see the impacts that they're going through.
On the last point on the board, what the success looked like. I have the sense that after today, that we're all kind of focused on the same point where we want to be. And does anyone not feel that? Do we all share the same goal after talking about it
I
today?
mean, from a land management standpoint, and Ben will tell you the same thing, and most firefighters, it's not the if, it's the when. And the when part of it is that we're ready for it. So when that fire comes, the forest is resilient enough to defend itself from that fire. That, you know, there's gonna be small localized disturbances, but it's not gonna look like the glass fire, where it looks like the wind now. That's the success part that we have to figure out.
So that's timing. Yeah, like yesterday.
Yeah.
So the when component, and this is above my pay grade, but, Pebble Beach, Yard Arm, Mount Vision Fire, Soberanis, these are fires that ignited in the coastal commission zone, in the coastal zone. And so we now have a decent history of fires that have ignited in an area that have otherwise been kind of not treated, not managed, and therefore may have increased in the capacity. Obviously, C-Ranch doesn't quite count because they're in the excluded zone, but it's an example of a coast fire. We've got to see the Fisk Mill site today with multiple fires in the same spot. So again, you know, this is likely a Sacramento type question more so than anything else. But you know, we now have enough fire history, I think, in that coastal zone to be able to say, if we do nothing, this is the result of the downstream probability of what's going to happen.
Yeah, vision is a good local example.
So unless there are any other comments, one sort of final note that I want to end on, and thanks Tracy for bringing it up, is just we may have a fight when we get to the Coast Commission. I don't know. It's going to kind of, you know, be up to county staff to be negotiating back and forth with coastal commission staff. But if we do, I hope that we can reach out to all of you and that you will attend the hearing. They do traditionally try to make the hearings for the Coastal Commission at least within a decent proximity of the location of the local coastal plan, right? So it might not be in Sonoma County, maybe we can convince to put it there, but it should be somewhere in the general area. And then the other thing is that not all coastal commissioners accept ex parte communications or sort of meetings. Some of them do. I know a few personally, and I will certainly reach out to them if this turns out to be controversial. Maybe it's not, maybe they're fine and it just all fell through, but if it does, I might try to recreate a tour like this for any coastal commissioner that would be willing to attend it. So I just want to kind of mention that to all of you, but I will definitely send out by email newsletter, and if anyone's not on that, please just leave us your email address, and we can add you or, put you on a special list. Because I think it would be really great to get folks talking about this and speaking up to the commission and really educating them, because I don't think that most of them really have any idea what their on the ground reality is and what you all went through. And quite frankly, I wouldn't even have any idea had I not been up here in January in the immediate aftermath, because it looks so much better than it did a few months ago. And yet still, right, you see the root balls everywhere, you see, trees that were sort of pulled apart, and the work that went in from the firefighters is amazing. So thank you all so much for your work. And thanks all for taking so much time out of your busy lives to attend this. And thank you so much, Matt, for leading a great site tour, and Eric for hosting us. Really appreciate it. So yeah, look forward to the next steps. Hopefully the next time it's come before the board of supervisors, we've got at least consensus on this one issue. I don't know about fences, but
On guard.
And if you do care about fences, May 1st, the day of the yacht club, we'll be fixing the fences then.